AP Psych, we're starting developmental today. Hard to believe, but it is the second to last unit of the 7 that we are reviewing for this year's AP test. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The only thing left is motivation, emotion, and personality. So today we'll be doing developmental. It's a little bit lighter on the terms, so should go a little bit quicker. Speaking of developmental, my child is playing in the other room, so I'm not sure how much that'll be picked up, but you might hear a little bit of that as well. So I'm going to be going off of the blank copy here, which you can download from the website. Beginning again with nature nurture, which is the debate to how much of what makes up our personality or anything about us is because of genetics, which would be the nature side, and then versus environmental factors like how we were raised, which is the nurture side. Continuity versus stages is another debate about when we develop, how much of that happens like on a smooth continuum? Do we just gradually get better at motor skills over life, or is there like distinct stages where you do a huge improvement on motor skills in a short amount of time, and then you do a huge improvement on language over a short amount of time? And it probably depends on what you're talking about between those two. Stability versus change is a debate on how much of our traits, of our personality traits, are stable, meaning they pretty much stay the same, and how much can they change. Freud thought that by the time you were 6 years old, for example, that pretty much your personality is set in stone, more or less. And then the humanist psychologists and behavioral psychologists would both say, no, it could definitely change. You're very fluid, and some things there's like a fixed point, but you can definitely move from that fixed point. Zygote, embryo, fetus are 3 of the stages of fetal development. Zygote is 10 days. Zygote is immediately from conception to 10 days after conception. After 10 days, a zygote looks basically like a circle. It's a number of cells put together, but it doesn't look like really a living thing other than just a circle of cells. After 10 days, it becomes an embryo, at which point it sort of looks like a tadpole, kind of, but it looks like a living thing. Then an embryo, after 9 weeks, becomes a fetus, and a fetus looks like a little baby. And then after it's born, the fetus becomes a living human baby. Teratogen is a harmful agent that attacks the baby. So it's any bad substance you put into your body that could harm fetal development. Fetal alcohol syndrome can happen as a developmental disorder when the mother consumes alcohol, or a large amount of alcohol during pregnancy. Can happen. And this is the image from Wikipedia that's given. It has distinct facial characteristics that can happen, as well as a lower IQ, mental retardation. Face preference is very interesting. So infants, immediately after they're born, with no environmental learning whatsoever, just seconds after they're born, or minutes after they're born, when given these 3 things to look at, you will notice that they look more at the face than they do either of the other 2. So we seem to be inborn with a face preference. So there's like biologically hardwired in us knowing what a face is the second we're born. Similar to a few other terms that have been in other units like concept, schema is a mental grouping of objects. So a schema would be like horse, which would be a grouping of all of the animals that fit horse. A lot of different types of horse, but they're all in the schema of horse. Assimilation is putting things into the schema, and accommodation is needing to remove them from the schema. For example, if you're driving down the road and you are trying to teach your kid about horses and cows, and you see this thing, you'd say, "That's a cow. Do you see the cow?" It goes, "Moo." So you put it in the cow. You say, "That's a cow." So here it goes in the cow schema. Then you see this thing and you say, "That's a horse." Horses say, "Neigh." So you put that in the horse schema. But then you run into a problem. In the next field, you see this thing, and your kid says, "Horse." You say, "No," because now you've incorrectly put cow into horse, which makes sense because it's a brown, large mammal thing. But at this point, he has incorrectly assimilated cow, or brown cow, into horse. So you need to accommodate that and put him into cow. You say, no, that's also a cow. Cows can be brown and white and black. The zone of proximal development is a term created by Vygotsky, who is a learning theorist. You can see his name up there on the terms. And it is basically the ideal difficulty level to learn a task. So the zone of proximal development for learning to ride a bike might begin with something like a tricycle and move on to training wheels, so a bicycle just with the added benefit of the training wheels, then move on to a bicycle, an actual two-wheel bicycle. If you go immediately to a bicycle like this person without doing the previous steps, you would be above the difficulty level of the zone of proximal development, and you might not learn as well because it would be too hard and you'd give up. But if you always stay at the tricycle, you also wouldn't learn because it would be too easy and you'd never challenge yourself. But moving at the appropriate speed through the appropriate difficulties would be the zone of proximal or like ideal development. Critical period is the ideal time to learn a skill. So there can be a critical period for language development. There can be a critical period for athletic development. Jeannie Wiley is a case study in the critical period because she didn't learn language until she was 12 years old because her parents neglected her and left her completely non-interacted with until she was 12 years old. And then scientists got a hold of her and were able to find out if she could still learn language at 12 years old, having missed her critical period, which is much earlier than that. And they found out that it was much harder for her at 12 than it would have been at 2 or 1. Imprinting is a special bond that is created primarily in animals, but also a little bit in humans in the first hours of life. So when an animal is born, the first thing that they see, they sort of associate as their primary caregiver, their mother. And ordinarily that is their mother, but there's been some cases where there's been ducks that were born or cats that the first thing they saw was a human or a different animal, and then they kind of associated that thing with mother. Temperament is an infant's emotional reactivity. So that's how easily they are aggravated or how easily they get angry or happy. That would be their temperament. Basic trust, I kind of wish this wasn't in this order, but basic trust applies to Erikson, who is this guy, Erik Erikson, funny name. He came up with a series of developmental stages. There's 8 of them, and they are pass-fail, sort of. If you successfully go through the stage, then you develop the first trait, which is the positive trait. If you fail the stage, then you develop the second trait. His most important, or at least most well-known stage, is his first one, trust versus mistrust. And that is up to 1 year old. If you successfully navigate that developmental period, you develop a sense of basic trust. And if you don't, then you develop a sense of mistrust. Basic trust, going back to that term, would be that you basically think the world is a good place and that adults are basically good people. And that's a positive thing for a very young child to believe. Self-concept and self-esteem are two similar but still different ideas. Self-concept is kind of how well you know who you are, the concept of who you are, and then self-esteem is how good you feel about yourself. So you can have a high self-concept, low self-esteem if you are very aware of who you are, but you don't like who you are. Or you can have a high self-esteem, you're very positive about yourself, but you don't really know who you are, would be a low self-concept, high self-esteem. Piaget had 4 stages of development: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. And probably the most important thing about Piaget's stages that you need to know, one is the order and ages of his stages, but also the things that happen inside of the stages, specifically object permanence, which is developed inside of sensory motor stage, egocentrism, which happens during pre-operational, concrete operational, which conservation tasks are learned in concrete operational, and abstract logic is learned in formal operational. So object permanence, egocentrism, conservation tasks, and abstract logic. Object permanence in sensory motor stage. When a child does not have object permanence, you're able to play peekaboo. So they believe that if an object leaves their vision, the object is gone. So I'm here, and now I'm gone. And now I'm here. If you believe that would be, you would not have object permanence. You would not believe an object is permanent despite not being able to see it. A child, there's some tests you can do. If you put an object underneath the hand with the ring in it, and you put an object underneath that, a child that knows object permanence would know to look underneath that hand that the object would still exist there. Even though he stops seeing it, he would look underneath that hand for the object. Egocentrism is you believe that everyone sees the world through your point of view, literally. So if there was two people looking at two different things, if mom was in the living room and a child that did not have egocentrism was in the kitchen, the mom could say, "What do I see?" And the child would describe kitchen things because he would think that the mother also sees what the child sees. That would be egocentrism. Conservation tasks is if you don't have a sense of conservation of liquid or solid, I guess, or mass, you would not understand that for the liquids part, in this first part, everyone agrees that the first cup and the second cup have the same amount of liquid. The problem is if you pour the second cup into a thinner, taller glass, it's going to look like this. And people that have not developed a sense of conservation will believe that the second taller glass has more liquid in it because it's taller. If you have developed that conservation, you will believe that they're still the same, or same as the third one. Length, if you've not developed conservation, you would still think that these two green lines are the same, but for the second one, you would think that this broken three-part line here would be more than the solid line because there's three of these and only one of these. And then abstract logic is being able to think abstractly, which a person that has not developed it is unable to do, and a person that has developed it is able to do. The three parenting styles, and they are authoritarian, permissive, and authoritative. Authoritarian is a military parenting style, and there are rules. Rules are strictly enforced. If you break the rules, there are punishments. And if you ask why rules exist, it's because I said so. Permissive is the other side, and that is there may or may not be rules, but if there are rules, if you break them, it's not that big of a deal, and they are not strictly enforced. Authoritative is sort of a mix between the two. There are rules and they are strictly enforced. However, the parent is willing to accommodate the rules if a special circumstance exists, as well as if you ask why do the rules exist, they're willing to explain to you why the rules. And generally speaking, authoritative tends to create the most well-rounded and well-adjusted children. In class, I do this thing where I say traits of women and men and have you guess which one's which, but we're going to skip over that. But there are obviously actual biological and environmental differences between men and women. Testosterone is the male sex hormone, so that's the hormone that creates a lot of masculine traits like facial hair, lower voice, muscular development is all built through testosterone, and not on the terms, but estrogen would be the female sex hormone. Role is how you're expected to act in a given situation, so your gender role would be the way your gender is expected to act. So girls are not supposed to play football. Girls are supposed to like pink. Girls are supposed to like being cheerleaders. And girls are supposed to be nice. Boys are supposed to grunt. And boys are supposed to like dirt and football. Social learning theory is kind of how it sounds. It was created by Albert Bandura, and it says that we can learn by imitating others. So children, as I'm learning with my new child, children learn by watching their parents. So they will literally imitate what their parents do. Kohlberg came up with 3 stages of moral development, and they are pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And it's 3 reasons why you may or may not follow the rules. Pre-conventional morality says you will follow the rules because if you don't follow the rules, there are consequences. If you don't do what mommy says, you might not get dessert, or you might get spanked, or you might go to timeout. Conventional morality is a little older, but that is you follow rules not because there's consequences, but because you're supposed to follow the rules. You just follow the rules, whether or not there are consequences. Post-conventional morality, at least according to Kohlberg, is sometimes you would actually ignore the rules for the greater good. You can think back to some of the segregation laws that were in existence, and if you disobeyed those American segregation laws, that might be post-conventional morality. So not obeying the law, but for the greater moral good. There are 2 ways that you, for instance, at McGinnis, that you could survey and see the difference between 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. One way is you could just right now, today, send out a survey to 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And that would be cross-sectional survey. Right now, you ask different age groups. Longitudinal survey would be you would ask all of the freshmen right now, then you'd wait a year until they were sophomores. You'd ask them again, then you wait a year until they were juniors, ask them again, wait a year until they were seniors, and ask them again. Longitudinal certainly takes longer and is more expensive and time intensive to do. So you would be tempted to say that longitudinal is better, and it is in some cases, but they are just kind of different, and they're better at different things. There are two types of intelligence, crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is the accumulation of knowledge, so that's knowing what the state capitals are to the states. And fluid intelligence is your ability to think abstractly and reason out situations. And that's Unit 6. So we only have one unit left. You'll just have to fill out the Google form for this unit, and that's it.